And we're back. Today's discussion will focus on content, the world of ideas. We'll also finish with basic terminology and a few other major concerns having to do with the vast world of the fine arts. So first up, content. We spent 2 full lectures covering form. Here's a single slide for content. But that's okay. We're used to thinking about content. On one hand, content is the whole point of artwork. It's the reason we make it. But on the other, content is so familiar to us that its meaning is kind of self-explanatory. That doesn't mean the content of a given work can't be incredibly complicated and rich. Of course it can, and often is in good works of art. It's just that I don't really have to explain to you what it is. For instance, when you walk out of a movie with a friend, you're likely to talk about what the movie was about and how the main characters acted. That's so common it hardly bears mentioning. Less common in the conversation are formal observations like lighting or camera angles, but that's why we spent so much time on form. You're not used to talking about it. But we can be pretty brief with content for now. Remember, form refers to the aspects of an artwork that pertain to its physical qualities and the way the visual elements are used within it. For instance, if you describe the prominent red color in a painting, you're talking about form. If you describe the way the artist used red to convey a sense of passion, you're talking about content. Content is the other side of the coin, so to speak. Content can involve the subject matter of the work, like maybe it's a sculpture of an elderly woman, or a painting of mountains in the distance, or a photo of a bottle of beer on the table. Subject matter isn't the same thing as content, but it certainly contributes to content. Theme, that's the thread of an idea throughout the whole history of art, sometimes below the surface. These are timeless ideas that have likely always been a part of art because they're essential to the human condition. Things like love, family, honor, sex, and death. Genre, that's the general category that artwork exists within. Like maybe it's a buddy movie, or a love story, or a landscape painting. The narrative is the story told by the artwork, like the plot of a book or a play. Not all artwork is narrative. Some abstract expressionist paintings, for instance, don't tell a story at all, but rather create a feeling or a mood. Since the beginning of this course, we've discussed the language of art, we've discussed form, and just now we've discussed content. There are just a few more loose ends we need to attend to before moving on. Here's a list of them. We'll describe each in more detail, but you've got patronage, period, creativity, symbolism, criticism, context, and the degrees of abstraction. Patronage. A patron is a person or group that supports artists. These people are often collectors. Every artist's ear perks up when they hear that word. Patrons can purchase existing works, commission new work, and they could also provide funding for an artist to live on, just in general, like through grants and awards. This is particularly important because removing the financial implications of making provocative artwork that a person wouldn't necessarily want to hang on their wall is good for society as a whole. An important function of art is to help society examine and question its assumptions. If the only artists that could make a living were the ones making sellable, lowest common denominator work that didn't offend anyone, our culture as a whole would suffer. It's healthy for a democratic society to be challenged from time to time. Anyway, a patron is a very important type of person for artists. Why are they important for art history? For some pretty obvious reasons, patronage has a huge effect on what gets made. Imagine the Renaissance without the church or the Medici family. Take those two entities out of the equation, and there goes a whole lot of the most well-known artworks of the Western world. Next, we have period. Knowing the time and place a work of art is made provides the context in which to examine the art, which can shed a lot of light on things. We'll break down most of this course into distinct cultural periods and see how they always inform the ones that come after. But distinctions aren't usually so neat and tidy. By the way, what art historical period are we in now? The magical catch-all word is contemporary. That doesn't really tell you anything. Is it postmodernism? Well, sort of, maybe. Or how about post-postmodernism? Well, like I said, not so neat and tidy. And besides, it's always hard to put a label on the current state of affairs because you're too busy living through it to have much perspective at all. How about creativity? This one's tough to adequately define. The use of the imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. Newness, originality. Ironically, creativity's importance is a relatively modern conceit. Most of us take for granted its significance in art, but it wasn't always an emphasis at all. We'll talk a lot about that a bit later on. And this isn't just an important for art, of course. All professions require creativity to excel. Symbolism is the use of a specific image that holds a shared meaning within a particular culture or subculture. Iconography is basically how symbolism is applied in artwork or in a religious setting. It's important to note that pictorial presentation doesn't necessarily illustrate the meaning of the symbol. Sometimes the meaning of a symbol can be indirect and obtuse, and it's only comprehended by people indoctrinated into a culture that understands a symbol. Sometimes one symbol could mean drastically different things depending on the cultural context. I lived in Tokyo for a while some time ago. When I first arrived, I got out a map and searched for interesting places to check out. Was I ever surprised to see little swastikas dotted around the city? A version of this image has been used for thousands of years in a number of cultures and religions, like Buddhism and Hinduism, as a symbol of the sun and good fortune. And that's why it was mentioned on the map of Tokyo, as it was a certain type of temple or something. But World War II and the horrors of Nazi Germany have radically altered its meaning, especially for us in America. And the original intention is entirely lost. Then we come to criticism. If a patron is an artist's best friend, their relationship to the critic is a bit more complicated. Criticism could be referred to in the formal sense, like an art critic who writes for the New York Times. Or it could just refer to the way people evaluate a work of art amongst their friends. Criticism establishes the worth of a piece of art. It can designate good versus bad. But what do you base that designation on? Maybe the quality of the craftsmanship, the aesthetic quality of the work, maybe the artist's intent, the ideas that form the basis of the work, how original it is, all sorts of things. But if so, some of those criteria can be extremely subjective. Do any of these criteria even matter, really? Perhaps more important than whether a work is good or bad is it successful? Successful at what? Perhaps whatever the artist set out to accomplish. But most importantly, does it move you? Does it make you agitated, enthralled, or pissed off? Does it make you feel anything at all? I'd much rather truly move someone with my art than just have them like it. That's a higher bar for sure. And one doesn't even have to like something to be moved by it. And does criticism really have to be about establishing worth? Descriptive analysis, also referred to as the critical process, describes work in formal terms rather than using value judgments. It's like a journalist reporting just the facts without trying to interpret their implications in an objective way. Whether or not that's even possible is for another discussion. Good art criticism can use aspects of both of these functions. Context is the environment a work of art exists in. This can have a profound impact on how people interpret the meaning of an artwork. Go back and watch some of the movies made by John Hughes in the 80s. He's the director of films like Vacation, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, an iconic voice of a generation whose movies spoke to people's souls in a deeply meaningful and special way. I caught a little snippet of one of his productions, Weird Science, on the TV the other day, and was flabbergasted at the overt sexism and racial stereotypes littered throughout the movie. It seemed completely normal at the time. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I'm kind of old. But now, in the context of contemporary society, these movies can be utterly cringeworthy at times, and even deeply offensive. But that kind of transformation has always taken place as civilizations evolve over time. Okay, the degrees of abstraction. This is an important concept to discuss and to try to clear up. The degrees of abstraction refer to how closely an image replicates the natural world. It's really a continuum rather than three discrete categories. But here they are. Representational art, sometimes referred to as naturalism or illusionistic imagery. This is art that is trying to faithfully replicate the visual world, the physical world. It's not necessarily realism. People make that mistake a lot. Realism means something totally different. I mean, they overlap, but we'll talk about that, especially when we get to the ancient Greeks and the classical Greek sculptures that were very lifelike, very representational, but not realism in the least. Nobody actually looked that way. They were idealized. So realism is a distinct term. But next on this, in this continuum here, is abstract art. In the strictest sense of the word, this involves imagery that still has one foot in the physical world, but it's stylized. So picture like a stick figure. That'd be a great example of like abstract art. Like I said, in this technically, anyway. Non-objective art, also referred to as non-representational art, this is sometimes called pure abstraction. This is where it goes so far that it no longer depicts any existing thing, but becomes its own reference. Instead of a painting pointing to something else and saying, "Here, I am a replication of this," the painting is saying, "This is the thing. I am the thing." This word is often used interchangeably with abstract art. This term, which I know is confusing, and it just is. But any image you see in any work of art will exist somewhere along this continuum. I'm hoping that this slide will help clarify the distinctions between these kind of broad overlapping categories. On the top is this photograph of a cow. It's a representational image. This could be a painting of a cow and look just as lifelike, but the point is it's faithfully reproducing an object the way it could exist in the world. So the one below it, you still see a certain amount of cowness in that. It's still, if I told you that's a cow, you can kind of still see it. And, again, in technical terms, that's an abstract image. Below that, these same shapes and colors are rearranged in a way to where there is really no cowness left at all. This is a non-objective image. But again, I want to reinforce the fact that these aren't necessarily like neat, three neat categories that are discrete from one another. Usually any work of art is going to straddle two of these categories. It's going to list somewhere along the lines between like being an incredibly faithful replication of something that could happen to its own self-referential universe. Here, this one is kind of maybe on the cusp of like representational imagery and abstraction, just because it's kind of stylized and kind of simplified. But it's still a cow. Okay, where do we go from here? We'll embark on a very broad survey of each of the major periods of art history with the context to help you understand what they mean, to you as an individual, to our culture as a whole, and to the culture the artists who made them were part of. Our entire civilization is, in many ways, a culmination, rejection, and assimilation of humanity's entire cultural history that leads us to right now. To understand our own culture, and to get the jokes that people tell at dinner parties, you have to understand the foundations it grew from. And now that you have some of the basic terminology to discuss art, that's what we'll do. Next time, in Introduction to Fine Arts, we'll explore the very beginnings of humanity's art experience and probe some of the most perplexing mysteries of human existence. Thanks for joining me, and until next time, farewell.